State. The current offensive by Arab and Kurdish fighters with American and British support started in June. Then IS controlled most of Raqqah. But now only a few hundred militants hold the centre of the city. The BBC is the only broadcaster to get access. Our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville and cameraman Darren Conway sent us their report, which does contain some distressing images.
This is a war of annihilation, says the United States. Raqqah is the battleground and the victim. These are Western coalition bombs targeting the fighters of the so-called Islamic State. More than 5,000 hit Raqqah last month alone. An entire city has become a no-man's land. Mile after mile, there's no life, no people. For years, IS terrorized and controlled these streets. Now, hundreds of those who called Raqqah home have been killed by coalition bombs meant to free them. The US-led mission disputes the figure and says that this is the most precise bombing campaign in history. They may be young and their army new, but the men of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces are winning. IS promised a new empire would grow here. Instead, the corpses of its fighters fill the gutters. First Mosul, now Raqqah. The caliphate is already dead. Nearby, another corpse rots, likely caused by a drone strike. The threat here is from snipers. A pause too long or a misstep, this female fighter would have lost her head. Instead, the shot hits the wall to the right. The danger lies around corners and in Raqqah's shadows. IS rarely come out and attack. They hide and wait. There are IS fighters hiding near a mosque. The Kurds throw everything they have at the gunmen. IS return fire. All of this to take just half a mile of road. When all else fails, an airstrike on the IS position that might have done the trick. We wait for the all clear. The instructions are simple: run that way and be quick. But as I get to the end of the street, it's clear the sniper is still there. He fires at us, but misses. The shots ricochet off the wall by the camera.
Hit right there.
The deeper into the city, the greater the danger. It's an improvised war. Here, Arab fighters have salvaged an IS armoured car. Like a prehistoric beast, it lumbers through a ruined landscape. Commander Abu Abdu knows that snipers only need a tiny window of opportunity. Captured ground, there's always the risk that IS will appear from behind. They've dug tunnels all over the city. The steel flanks of the armoured shield us through yet another sniper alley.
Run.
There's a sniper just around that corner, just at the end of the street. We have to be very careful here. This is the centre of Raqqah, the very heart, if you like, of the Islamic State. Naim Roundabout is a few hundred metres away from here. Locals call it the Circle of Hell. For these fighters, it's critical territory to retake, but it's much more than that, because there their comrades and their friends were beheaded, and there they were crucified. When they take that territory, they say, they will cleanse Raqqah of the Islamic State. But before the cleansing, more blood has to be spilt. One of the fighters has been shot. IS control the rooftops. The men are pinned down. They're almost in panic. They're desperate. Their comrade is just out of reach. Again, an airstrike is called in. This time it works. Finally, they can get to him. He's rushed to a field hospital. But he doesn't survive. His name was Nadim Abu Aziz. He was 21 years old. The fighters are exhausted. They've had too many days end like this.
We'll keep going. We will sacrifice our blood for our people inside, because they're having a tough time, a really tough time. Yesterday Daesh attacked us with their men dressed as women, and there were big numbers, like 100. We thought they were civilians, and they also had children with them. And suddenly the civilians and children went to the side of the road, and then they started to fire at us.
In the 6 days we were inside Raqqah, we didn't see a single civilian. Thousands, though, are still trapped in IS areas. Raqqah for them is an ironclad death trap. They'd have to go through all of this to escape. It's not clear who is friend or foe. Raqqah was the Islamic State's Syrian capital. Now it's a city fit for no one. In Somerville, BBC News, Raqqah.
Extraordinary reporting there from Quentin and his team in Raqqah. Well, we're joined now by Shiraz Maher of the War Studies Department at King's College London. Thanks very much, Shiraz, for joining us here on the programme. I mean, just looking at Quentin's images there, Raqqah is completely devastated.
Yeah, we've seen this kind of devastation before as well, of course, in Mosul, and that does tend to happen in these big campaigns to try and push back a group like ISIS. That's predominantly because of the way that the campaign is being fought, with lots of aerial support coming in from the coalition, which is seeking to help on the ground forces and is really giving them the decisive edge in order to be able to drive IS back in a number of these areas.
Certainly in Raqqah, there are only a few hundred fighters left, so the Arab and Kurdish fighters are gaining ground now.
They are. I mean, those who have remained for ISIS, however, inside Raqqah are amongst the most zealous of its recruits. A lot of the fighters had the opportunity and the option to leave Raqqah before this offensive. A lot of them repositioned themselves and moved themselves out to Deir ez-Zor, which is, of course, a much easier battlefront for ISIS. So those who remain have taken an oath and a vow to remain there, to try and hold their city as best they can. They really essentially signed a suicide pact for themselves, and so they are going to fight, as you've seen in the package, street by street by street, until the bitter end.
You know, I've just returned from Mosul. I was there a few weeks ago, and the sense that you get is a lot of these fighters have just blended back into the community. So while the area in the city, and you can see the same thing in Raqqah, has been devastated, their ideology hasn't been killed.
Not at all, and of course this is the lesson of pretty much all the wars we've seen post 9/11. You can go into Afghanistan, into Iraq, now into Mosul and Raqqah, and overthrow an existing administration, be that a government or an established sort of insurgency such as IS. But it's one thing to clear a town, it's quite another thing to try and hold it. And I think this is the really important point that I want to make for the viewers, is that in fact, what is ISIS? This comes back to the question how we view this movement. It's operated as a proto-state. This military campaign is there to try and drive back its claims to statehood, its claims to so-called caliphate. But it remains an aggressive insurgency, and this campaign will do nothing to address that, and it remains a terrorist movement, and this campaign does nothing to address that either. This is far from the end of ISIS. It may be the beginning of the end of their presence in Raqqah, but this is far from the end of ISIS itself.
So do you think that they will re-emerge, an ISIS 3.0, another form, another name?
Well, ISIS, of course, is a spin-off, a mutation, a metastasization of what we saw with Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And if we had been having this discussion several years ago, we'd have been saying Al-Qaeda in Iraq was defeated. We'd had the surge, the Sunni tribes had moved against Al-Qaeda and associated groups, and there was a sense of mission accomplished in terms of quelling Al-Qaeda and that element of the Sunni insurgency there. Of course, it never went away. It moved up to the border towns of Syria and Iraq. It simply sat there and waited for the right moment to spring back into life, and of course that moment presented itself when the Syrian crisis began. So today we're already seeing ISIS pulling back to the deserts of Deir ez-Zor, particularly to, again, those border towns that straddle Syria and Iraq, and they will regroup, they will remold themselves, and they will wait for the opportunity once again. But this situation is very different, because before in Iraq, of course, there was a lot of Western presence, a lot of military troops. Syria and Iraq, particularly Syria, remain a mess today, and so while Syria in particular remains essentially an imploded and fractured society, ISIS will continue to find very fertile territory there.
We'll have to watch closely as to what happens next. Shiraz Maher, thanks very much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you.